So I would like to welcome everybody who came to listen or who is listening and planning to listen to the CEEMAN Lounge with IMTA faculty. IMTA stands for International Management Teachers Academy. And I remember that about 25 years ago, we were making some analysis with Professor Abel in Eastern Central Europe, and we came to conclusion that this part of the world would need immediately 2,500 new faculty of management and about 10,000 top managers and about 90,000 middle managers, etc., etc. So, but for us, it was being educators was the most important, the data, what a big lack of the faculty we have. And so we decided soon afterwards in CEEMAN, Association of Management Schools, in that time in Eastern Central Europe, later it became a global association, we decided to make a program IMTA, International Management Teachers Academy. And looking to the faculty, which we also didn't have, we were so lucky that in our school at IDC Bled School of Management, we had some great faculty like Joe Pons and some others. But also, you know, I was meeting Jim Ellert at IMD Lausanne. I was meeting J.B. Kasarjian, who was at that time also at IMD Lausanne, and he came to visit our school. I was also later meeting Zistov Obvoy and Arshad Ahmad, and the latest, I mean, at the end, some years ago, Tony Buono. And so we were, when the sustainability became a very important factor of education and the need to have this in curriculum. And so we were creating the team. I have to say that I never worked with any better team than I do now during this 21 years. That we had already many graduates, some hundreds of graduates, and some fantastic faculty who is writing case studies, articles, presenting their association in a very decent way, I mean, on a great way around the world in academic circles. And IMTA is the one and this great faculty that did that. And so, Jim Ellert, former professor of IMD Lausanne, and now the visiting professor at IDC Bled School of Management. When I said now, I made a mistake because he is already for 30 years a visiting faculty, the best professor of finance we ever had. Joe Pons also for about 20 years and more as a professor of marketing at IDC School of Management, but also former professor at IESE International Graduate School of Management in Spain, and now he's presiding Axioma Marketing Consultant. J.B. Kasarjian, a very famous professor at IMD Lausanne and at Babson College, and where he is still working and having lectures. And I also have to say that his case studies are classics in management education. Very, very special. Zistov Obvoy from Poland, professor of strategic management at the Faculty of Management, University of Warsaw, and Kuzminski University, Poland. Also very, very good institutions, and somebody who was probably the most impressing us by excellent teaching and by excellent research. And so when I'm sometimes telling the story, when I came to Poland to make publicity for our school, and I was telling them we have professors from America, I mean from USA, from Canada, etc. Then they said, and at the end I mentioned, and also from Poland. And when I mentioned his name, then they said, then you must be a good school. So a legend in Poland. Arshad Ahmad, the Vice Chancellor of Lahore University of Management Science, LUMS, Pakistan, and he was also before in Canada for many years. A great, at McMaster University, a Vice Chancellor, Vice Provost for teaching and learning, and also somebody who is extremely good in finance and very, very special professor. I think that in methodology, there are not too many alike. And then, of course, Tony Buono, Professor of Management at Bentley University and a founding director of Bentley Alliance for Ethics and Social Responsibility. That is in USA, you certainly know that. And so with him, as I mentioned already, we brought sustainability in IMTA, and we have quite a big interest there. I did not mention that J.B. Kasarjian is a great professor of leadership. For others, I mentioned what topics they are teaching. And now I would like they are all this group of faculty is led by Jim Allard, who is a director of IMTA, and somebody who should get a Nobel Prize for educating, for caring about students, etc. All that is what you learn in IMTA if you come. And so now I shall give the floor, before I give it to Jim Allard to start to lead and to facilitate the lounge, I would like to give the word to CEEMAN director, Olga Veligurska, who will tell you some words and some publicity about CEEMAN so that you know where we are expecting you. Olga, floor is yours. And welcome everybody once again. Also the participants, not only the faculty, because we always say to faculty, welcome, welcome, because they come from all parts of the world and we haven't seen each other for such a long time. So welcome everybody at today's event. Olga, please.
Thank you, Danica, for the wonderful introduction. I think now all of us here in this room, it's really like family. Because for me personally, it's been 16 years now in CEEMAN and with IMTA, and working with this fantastic team of faculty. Here is where the IMTA magic happens on the shore of Bled Lake. And CEEMAN is now really a global association representing 50 countries. And just a couple of words about IMTA. So that covers both general pedagogical issues and discipline-specific aspects, and a lot of work goes into also teaching with cases, the case method, and other tools. So as JB says, IMTA will definitely enrich your pedagogical tool chest and help you become a better teacher. So a little bit also of focus of IMTA faculty in action, just that you see how it all happens. We work both in plenary sessions in small groups, very boutique setting, especially in the disciplinary tracks in the second week. A lot of interaction among faculty, among participants, and faculty team is there with you the whole time, which I think is very unique and very special during IMTA. And of course, a lot of collaboration among alumni after the program. We have had more than 650 participants since IMTA started in 2000, representing 50 countries, 51. And for most of them, it's a very special experience, often exceeding their expectations. A lot of IMTA alumni are also now in management positions and help further spread the impact they received at the program. Just a couple of words, you're welcome also at our upcoming events. Next week, we will have 2 sessions with IMTA faculty, and all educators are welcome to join them. We also have programs for program managers and administrators. We will talk more in autumn and have a workshop on online teaching and engagement. And of course, we would be very happy to see everyone at our annual conference in September. So please follow us also on our website for all the updates and activities. I would like to welcome participants of this session as well, and we have more than 160 participants registered for this session today, representing 43 countries around the world. So warm welcome. We are recording the session. We also have Facebook live stream, so you will receive the recording. You can share it with others, spread the message. And if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A section. We don't have chat enabled, but I will be happy to help convey your questions and messages to the panelists. So thank you so much. Enjoy the panel.
Danica, thank you very much for the kind introductions. Welcome again to all of you that are joining us for this session. I'm going to start addressing a question to all of the panel members. Over the last few months, many schools have started experimenting for the first time with online learning. Some are extending their online offerings. The question that I have for you is the following. On a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is a disaster, 3 is satisfactory, 5 is the same quality as face-to-face classroom delivery, what is your assessment of online teaching as a response to COVID-19? And could you initially say a few brief things that allow you to arrive at this score? And I'm going to start here with JB Kasarjian.
I think thanks, Jim. I think there's a very important intervening variables. It's a subject that's become important to me through this period of crisis we're all living through. I've always felt that even in face-to-face, you have to know your students before you start teaching them. You have to know where they're coming from. You have to know what resources they bring that you can use in the classroom, and so on. All that's happened by teaching online is that this has become even more critical. You really have to take the time to get to know where your students are coming from in terms of not only educational experience, but also work experience, also their current position. Because if you can relate your comments, your questions, your responses to their contribution to where they're coming from, they are much more engaged, they speak much more usefully, and the experience is satisfactory for both the participants and the teacher. So what score would I give? I think if you don't know your students, you're very likely to be giving it a score of 1 or 1.5. If you do know your students and you incorporate that in the process, in the learning teaching process, then I think you're more likely to be at 4.5, which is where I feel I have been. Related to that is, I think you have to learn to listen in new ways, which I hadn't realized before. You really have to learn to listen what the participants or the student is trying to say, even if they're not able to do it effectively or in an eloquent way. Both of those processes can be helped by the teacher knowing the student's background, where they're coming from, and bringing them into the discourse in a more comfortable way. So my score is somewhere between 1.5 and 4.5, Jim, for the reasons that I gave. I believe learning to listen in a more effective way to students and knowing where students are come from, the two are related. I think you can create a much more creative and productive teaching and learning environment.
Arshad, could you come in next?
Phone.
You're still mute.
Your microphone now.
There you go. Okay, how's that?
Good.
Great. Okay, so a warm welcome to all the participants. I was reading the list and, just got excited and reminded by the wonderful memories and associations with all the names of the participants who've joined us. And of course, my colleagues, wonderful to see them again. I'm very happy to be here. So the question about my assessment of online teaching, well, I think we shouldn't confuse the medium with the persona behind it. So if you were a boring professor and you were dull and you didn't care about your students, I'm not sure if that's going to change if you are online or offline. So, I don't think it's really about the medium, and this is what JB was talking about as well. It's all about students and it's about their learning, and it's only about students and what they're thinking. So we have to figure that one out, whether you're online or offline. But I think, suppose we had a lot of data and we could compare our performance, teaching effectiveness and so on before COVID and after COVID, I would guess a few things here. So a couple of points here. First of all, I would say that, both teachers and students have had an exceptionally difficult semester. Teachers have probably felt very disoriented, probably feel loss of intimacy with their students. And they may have worked very hard to prepare slides or to try and replicate what they did in the classroom and found this to be a frustrating experience, maybe even experienced a loss of power and a loss of control because they're no longer a sage on the stage. But really, if we shift back to the student learning experience, the first thing is to make sure that students had access and good devices and good bandwidth. Whatever learning management system was being used. There was a big transition there, and that probably caused a lot of frustration and reduced some of the quality. The other thing is working from home. My goodness, I mean, everyone's doing that. That's a big deal because the boundaries between homework and housework get very blurred in this situation, especially if you're a female, by the way. In Eastern cultures, especially the expectations from females are a lot more than from the guys, and it's not a good deal for them. Of course, they need, all students need a space to learn, and we know a lot of people have had cabin fever and trying to find new support networks for them to continue their learning. But then most of all, I think the most important thing is that there have been real hardships along the line. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic here. People have lost family, friends. Many are infected or ill. There is an extreme worry, an uncertainty. This is a perfect storm for everybody, and especially for our students. There are mental health issues that have increased. People feel isolated. And of course, the prospects aren't very good. The job market, the global recession, and most of all, I think there is this confusion with social media and the chatter that you constantly see on WhatsApp or whatever your group is. It can drive you completely insane. So one advice is shut those devices off. But I guess I would add as a last point that online learning has actually, despite all of this, been a good thing. And you might say, why have I come to that conclusion? And that is because I think it raises fundamental questions about student learning, about pedagogy. It raises questions about, where can we put that learning before our teaching? And if we can use this as a way of offering more options to students, online being an option. Campus experience is always going to be there, and it should always be there. But online then becomes an additional option of flexible access to learning. And so all in all, that's a good thing. But to answer what has been my grade, I think this is you can choose any number as JB very wisely chose from 1 to 5, anything in between. I would think it probably dropped. Most people's score went down this term, but it doesn't mean it has to stay there.
Thank you, Arshad. Tony.
Yeah, let me build on. I think both Arshad and JB raised some very good points. And looking back to the experience at Bentley, like a lot of schools in March, we went completely online. And talking to a lot of my colleagues, they felt that it actually went much better than they had anticipated, even though they hadn't really had much experience. But in conversations, one of the things that came out is that they've already developed classroom norms from getting together in person for over a semester. And so when students came back after a couple of weeks in spring break, they were just so happy to see the professor, to see their colleagues, to see their fellow students, that they were very excited about it. And so I think that made it a little bit easier. I think what's much more of a challenge is if we start from scratch, from totally online without that connection. As JB was saying, it's critical to really get to know your students. It becomes that much more challenging. And I think it puts that much more pressure on us to create more virtual office hours, more opportunities to really try to understand our student base before we start teaching. The other thing, and I fully agree with Arshad, is that this is very new to us. But at the same time, increasing use of online education, it expands our reach exponentially. And the potential to bring in guest speakers, to do some innovative things really begins to increase quite a bit. But I think we need to rethink how we approach our teaching. So here's where I think design thinking comes into play. And one of the things that I've been doing is kind of recreating many of my sessions into modules, shorter times, and really thinking, what is it that I'm actually trying to get students to understand? And one of the things that has been working very well is I've been experimenting with something called keynote listeners. It's a role I rotate through all the different students. So after I'm talking for 10, 15 minutes, we go through a lesson, I put it to them and say, what did you hear? What were your takeaways? And then use that to build conversation among the students as to how they can be engaged. And so I think we're still struggling. I would have this in my score right around 3, maybe a little bit better. But as people get into it and experiment with these types of things, I think we become much better over time in using this technology.
Thanks, Tony. Joe.
Hi. Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be meeting virtually so many past and future IMTA participants. I saw the list and I was impressed with the amount of people from the different tracks, many of whom I remember really well. Now, trying to address your question, Jim, the first thing that comes to my mind is just to be realistic when we look at how exceptional this time has been. Because, when the world broke down in the middle of March, business schools, universities did not really have a choice. We went online because we couldn't go anywhere else. It was either go online or don't go. Therefore, we just had to make do with whichever technology we had. And we did the best. We learned by doing. We minimized the drawbacks. And after a few months, we can say, of course, we have learned something. We have achieved certain things, etc., etc., etc. Having said that, I would like to approach this topic from something that happened in my field, in marketing and sales, many years ago. Many years ago, companies used to have something called sales forces. And a sales force was a group of people who basically went around calling on customers, being good and effective loud speakers, communicating the value of the offering that the company had. And then, many, many years ago, the companies whose salespeople were only loudspeakers started realizing that they were missing out on a fantastic opportunity because they were not creating as much value as they could by just having people repeat whatever headquarters had told them. To a certain extent, this is something that is happening nowadays. Those of us who are academics, who create value by basically being effective loudspeakers, or effective parrots that know very well how to transmit certain bits of information from teacher to listener. You know, for those of us who've been doing mostly this is going to be a very tough environment because, my friends, we're going to have more and more competition, and I really welcome that competition. It's about time. Now, if you sit at another end of this continuum, if you claim to have a one-star Michelin restaurant, the dining experience at the Michelin restaurant is very different from the takeaway food, right? So besides getting to know the students, besides the profile of the person, etc., we need to talk about your own personal style, the strengths and weaknesses that you bring to the teaching experience. Because, I mean, something can be achieved online, quite a lot can be achieved online, particularly when we talk about how we learn to listen in the new environment, how to learn to appreciate that time has to be dealt with in a different dimension, that it takes, you know, it takes much longer to create an aha moment in a lecture when it takes place online. And you know, how the people watching this are evaluating my empathy? You know, those of you who have had me in your classroom know exactly how to do this because you're using memory. Many of you who never saw me before today don't really know what to, you know, what to make out of this and how to formulate an opinion. So we need to add educational value. How we do that is a function of many other aspects. Is a function of the alternatives available. In the last few months, we did not have an alternative, which means that the analysis that we are performing at the moment is a little bit biased. It was either go online or no go. This has affected, you know, it has helped us learn a little bit, but when times come to normal, I think, you know, face-to-face is going to be more precious than ever, because face-to-face will have to earn the time that it uses rather than be accepted as the only alternative to performing an educational experience. So allow me, Jim, to finish this small or short talk without even giving you one number.
Thank you, Joe. Christoph.
Oh, good afternoon, and glad to welcome all of you. I've seen the list, and I'm happy that some of the strategy track participants and IMTA participants attended, and welcome to all newcomers. The question was about the number. My number would be 3.5. And to me, the online teaching and experience of the last few months was, to summarize, I would call this DDD, 3D. Now, online teaching is doable. It is difficult, and it is democratic. First of all, I think it is doable, and I really, I think that some of the comments of my distinguished colleagues are incredibly important, but to me, especially the comment by Tony resonated because, frankly speaking, most of us here in Poland didn't teach just online courses. We taught hybrid courses because we started the course before the pandemic struck. So I've seen my students. I had this hands-on experience with them for at least few weeks. So this is, I think it's different from completely alien situation when we are meeting students only online. It is doable if you change your technology of teaching, if you shorten your class time, if you create a different rhythm, if you use a lot of movies, examples, if you relate to what is happening outside, and if you understand complexities of the students sitting with their little sisters and brothers in one room with the major task, with the sick parents and hundreds of things that we normally don't care too much about. I think it's one of the little pieces of advice that I gave to all of my younger colleagues is never to make a cold calls. Never ask, particular student that is online about anything, because he might not be online, because he has to attend to more important things at home at the moment, even if he is visible as a participant. So to me, cold calls are off under the circumstances. You have to respect partially privacy of these people that are attending your course. So I think it's doable. First, I think it's difficult for the reason that I mentioned. And frankly speaking, I think it's awful for many little subtle reasons. And I think it's boring. It's boring for the delivery boy, for me, and it's boring for the participants. And in order to check my hypothesis, I attended a few such courses as a student. It's impossible to listen. Now, and I don't care how good you are. Now, if you attend just online course, it has to be repackaged, because the normal course is it's just tiring. So I think it's very difficult form, and probably we'll have hybrid courses coming as an option. But what I found, and this is my final note, sort of refreshing, it's that they are much more democratic. Because normally prof or doc or whoever you are listening to us at the moment, you are the king of the class. They are sitting and you are standing. You watch them from the above, and you are coming with this sort of authority given by the fact that it's your course, it's your outline, it's your experience, etc. If you are a very good teacher, you could play it differently. If you are inexperienced, you play it differently, but still, it's your class. Online, to me, I discovered is very democratic environment. It's not your class. People are out there. You don't see them. You don't hear them mostly. You can create key listeners. That's a super duper technique. You can watch your screen pretending that you are having eye contact. But the truth is that you are one of many. So I think it's the first opportunity to give class back, really. And it's pretty interesting and difficult experience to operate in such unusual for academics environment. But I think that's a good part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Krzysztof. I have one more question that I'm going to ask to each of the panel members. And Joe, I'm going to start with you. We know you, Joe, as a very successful and admired case teacher. What works and doesn't work so well when teaching cases online? Could you share with us some of your do's and don'ts from your experience with online teaching?
Now, the first thing that comes to my mind is that whoever invented case teaching didn't think of the online delivery method. Let's say, this is not a methodology that has been designed having in your mind the distant sort of delivery of the methodology. Having said that, and as I said in my earlier answer, the circumstances are what they are. We are forced to using this, and even if we are not forced, at some point in time, we will need to develop a hybrid sort of module whereby some cases will be taught offline and some cases will have to be taught online. Now, I'm going to give 2 or 3 flashes as practical as possible to what I do that I have learned to realize that it works. And of course, you know, you can take many other things and say, well, then if you didn't mention it, that it means it doesn't work very well. You know, one point is something that I learned from my brilliant colleague, JB Kasarjian. JB likes to do something that he calls buzz groups. You know, and he splits people in small groups, and inside the classroom, at some points, he shifts the emphasis of the discussion from the general plenary session to smaller group discussions that will go on for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, at the end of which people will report back to plenary what their conclusion has been. I have experimented and I have discovered that this works pretty well with Zoom, so that I can send people to, you know, discuss things in groups of 6. I don't really know what happens in that period of time, but when they report back to the plenary, their thinking about that issue has moved forward, and I can only guess, but I think the guess is right, that there has been a higher level of involvement from most of the people in that small Zoom group. So I tend to plan my case discussions around key questions where I can send people to small groups, so that in each case I can do that maybe 2 or 3 times. That works not only in terms of maximizing the engagement, but also in terms of changing activity, which I think is so useful in the online environment to prevent people from being bored by watching the same thing over and over again and just, you know, falling into the temptation of the phone next to them, you know, which is, if it's a big temptation in the classroom, you can imagine how big a temptation is when they're sitting on their own desks. Now, another consideration on case teaching. The key learning points have to be made more explicit more often, because in an online context, it's very difficult to create an aha moment when you see in the eyes of the participants that a discovery has been made. Nobody has to tell you. It's in the air, but you will not make a mistake, and you will know exactly when that moment has happened. You will see it in the eyes, you will see it in the way people breathe, in the way they move their bodies. In the online environment, this is not possible, at least not yet, or at least I have not developed the skills to do it. So I need to repeat the key learning messages a good few times. And sometimes I need to ask each one of these small Zoom groups to come up with 1 or 2 key learning points, so that among all of us we decide what has been important. We cannot forget that in case teaching, learning is very intimate. So what might be a key discovery for me may have been absolutely obvious, superficial, or even ridiculous to 10 more people in that Zoom gathering. Therefore, you know, I cannot forget that. One last point. Management of time. Those of you who have seen me in class, you may realize that God did not give me an infinite amount of patience. I mean, it's something that I run short of, sometimes far too often. This affects the quality of my teaching online tremendously, and I've got to bite my tongue or whatever comes near in order to realize that I've got to allow natural, amounts of time to things, and the dialogue is not as live, and you just have to wait for things to come to an end and to come to a conclusion. This would be more or less what I can, speak at this point in time. Maybe we will come back into more details later.
Joe, thank you. We have about maybe 3 minutes for each of the other panelists to answer one question. JB, what skills or behaviors that we have not already discussed do you think teachers should focus on most to become better online teachers? Do you have anything to add to that discussion?
First of all, I strongly support everything Joel said. And I'm learning from my colleagues. I think Krzysztof's comment about how the process becomes more democratic is incredibly true. You're not the conductor anymore. You're just one of the instruments on the side. I think listening has become much more important. What I've discovered painfully is how much in a live face-to-face class I depend on body language.
Absolutely.
I didn't realize how powerful that was. And I mean body language very broadly defined, not just the way somebody sits, how do they turn, what's happening to their head and hands and so on, how do they move in their chairs, how do they relate to the class. And I think this is connected both to Krzysztof's point about democracy, where you're not the conductor managing this complex orchestra, you're just one corner, one piece of it. The behavior that I found useful, one of the interesting things that happened, a group of my students, after the pandemic, by themselves, about 12 of them, decided to form an informal seminar, entirely their initiative. I had nothing to do with it. They called it Coffee with JB, even though JB doesn't drink coffee. I would rather have had wine, but that wasn't available, Krzysztof. And what I discovered, these are highly motivated, probably the brightest students in about of the 150 MBA students were in this group. And what I discovered is Krzysztof, it's not cold calling, but it's maybe related to that. I would give an assignment online to say to, let's say, 2 people or 3 people to listen very carefully what Joe is saying at the moment in the discussion and to come back and tell us what their reaction is. So I would assign roles of the 12 people on the online class to comment on particular issues that I felt were critical. Joe, in a sense, it's a bit like a buzz group, except it's much more focused. It says, listen to X person. He said something I think is profound or significant or provocative, and see what you think about it. And I think what this has done is it focuses people's ability to listen and think at the same time. Because Krzysztof is right. Their mind is, if they're sitting at home, there's a kid comes along, as just came in, Joe's son, and you have to make allowances for that. You're in a sense invading their privacy, to use Krzysztof's word. So I find that giving an assignment to 1, 2, or 3 people usually two people, I would say, listen to what Tony is talking about on this point. I would interrupt Tony because he raised an important point, and I would give an assignment to Arshad and Shishtof to comment on that. I found that particularly helpful. It also forces me to listen in a different way. Joe made an interesting point about making the key learning points more explicit or more clear. By doing that, I clue myself in to be more focused. Because I'm asking them to be focused, I end up being more focused. I say, I agree with the first part of this statement, but I want to add something to the second part. I don't know if that makes sense, Jim, but those are very micro level techniques of behavioral change that I found really useful. And people have commented afterwards. They said, when you asked me to listen to Joe and comment on it, I had to listen differently. And that kind of reinforced the process. I'll stop there.
Thank you, JB. Arshad, do you have a view on whether teachers should change their student assessment approach when teaching online?
Arshad, you have to unmute.
I used to talk about silence a lot when we used to be together. So maybe this is another exercise of silence. Just mute yourself and see if your gestures are going to get through and have people imagine the best that can come out of you. Assessments are clearly, they've always been paramount. If you give a student a course outline, online or offline, the first thing they do is not look at the learning outcomes or the course description. They go straight to the assessments to see how much work is involved. And that's a very rational thing to do, and students should continue to do that. I think online, the assessment becomes even more challenging and important to focus on. If we're focused on minimizing our work as teachers, we tend to choose the easy way out by giving large percentages on final exams and on practices that really we need to question once again. I mean, final exams, by the way, offer no feedback at all. So if that's 50% of your mark, then students have no idea how to learn from their performance on the final for that 50%. So we can start asking some difficult questions and think more about formative assessments that are ongoing throughout the semester, and not lump them as one or two short deals, which are anyways not as authentic as, perhaps those that have to do with the real purpose of what it is that you're trying to have students learn. That means to me more choices. So thinking about more choices and more options for students where they can demonstrate their learning. Low tech if possible. Try not to burden yourself with too much technology, but think about, maybe even ideas like contract grading, where you accomplish certain types of outcomes and you get a pass grade. You do more, you get a B. You do more, you get an A. And so not everybody wants an A. Not everybody wants a C. And so this is again in the idea of democratizing not just the teaching part, but also the learning part. One thing we did that was very helpful during the pandemic was to include a pass-fail option, because everything got disrupted halfway through. And what we said was, look, you're going to get assigned a grade. You had half of your grade before the pandemic, half afterwards online. So the instructor will assign the grades, and then you decide whether or not that grade is appropriate, because you have an option. And the option is you can choose a pass or fail, or you can choose to do the course again at no cost. because this is no fault of your own that we found ourselves in this situation. So this kind of flexibility gives the learner a better handle on what it means to get a grade, you know, whether we are after the GPA or whether we're really after learning something. And I think it speaks to empathy, something Joe talked about, which is critical in thinking about assessments, is to put yourself in the shoes of the learner. A lot of our students were saying, we've got 5 courses and it seems like now the work is even more than it was ever before. And they are drowning in that work. And the teacher who is not empathetic to this deluge of demanding a lot of assignments that really are, at the end of the day, you know, using very low levels of understanding, people are just remembering and regurgitating. Get rid of those if you can. So I think there is a lot to be said in thinking deeply about assessments, and a word for administrators, since I deal with a lot of them. And that is, you know, stop preaching and start teaching. In other words, take a course. If you're a dean, take a course. If you're a vice president, take a course. Take a course out online. Better still, teach a course. So I think this is the most humbling thing that one can do. The shift has been towards thinking about learning and putting learning first and teaching second. So that is a big lesson from COVID as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Arshad. Tony, in 3 minutes, if you can, has the pandemic raised new ethical issues related to business education and to teaching and learning on this topic that should be resolved?
Yeah, good question, Jim. And I think I'd like to respond to that on 2 different levels. One deals with how we teach, but I think also one of the things we're learning coming out of this pandemic that we're still struggling with is what we teach. And what are the implications for how we think about business, how we look at the role of business. To go back very quickly in terms of how we teach, I think a number of very good points that have raised. JB gave, you know, some pretty examples of the use of what I would call these keynote listeners. I mean, I firmly agree with Christoph, is that cold calling becomes much more problematic in an online environment. But one thing I've been playing with is warm calling. I mean, JB's example is perfect. Let students know up front, you're going to be expected to play this role. Here's what I'm looking for, so they can really focus more and be prepared. And once you start seeding it and rotating that role across all of the participants, once you start seeding those keynote listeners, it does have kind of a natural effect to kind of engage people. So it's not just you, but many instances using the students themselves to try to highlight what are the key learnings, the key lessons you should take away. And I think Joe is right on, is that we need to reinforce that much more fully than we would normally do in an in-person classroom. The second thing in terms of what we teach and what the role of business is I think, again, the pandemic, and on top of that, all the view of all of the racial inequalities and inequities that we're seeing across the world really begins to raise questions of, well, what is the purpose of business? What should we be thinking of? What should we be looking at? And so I think the whole notion of corporate social responsibility is going through a transformation in and of itself. And I think more and more, we're not only talking about huge corporations, but companies in general. And so I think where we're headed is the new CSR, company stakeholder responsibility, is looking at the relationship between companies, regardless of their size, the role they play in their communities, and how they impact the specific stakeholder groups that they interact with. And so I really do think we're beginning to question more and more, what is the purpose of the corporation? And do we expect companies to follow a higher purpose where they do really reach out and attempt to do good as well as do well in the marketplace?
Thank you, Tony. Christoph, you have the view that students are eager to learn about the crisis during the sessions with you. Can you tell us briefly how you're adjusting your course content or course design, delivery to meet this challenge?
I did two things. I mean, and I think in this regard, Tony, recent comment about is it relevant is especially important. Now, what I try to do is to make the course that is, and I'm telling it with full responsibility, that is almost by default boring, more enjoyable and more relevant. I do it more enjoyable by adding, Joe would call it probably case studies, but I'm just adding movies. And in my last course in strategic management, I added Witcher, Godfather, Inception, Moneyball, Every Other Sunday, Leon Professional, The Riders of Lost Ark, The Scent of Woman, and Home Alone, of course, and ask students to find elements of strategy in these movies. And it was amazing because these movies, Hollywood is not stupid. I mean, they absolutely are strategizing in these movies. So we talk about, you know, the different aspects of strategy from the movie perspective. But this was sort of entertaining. Now, what I think is more relevant is to use the pandemic situation to make the points. And I did it in two things. First of all, I twisted my course more toward crisis management and managing and strategic choices during the war situation and during the economic crisis situations. And it was a great surprise to my students to learn that we know something about it as researchers and teachers. And the first thing we know that environment matters. Now, in the war and the crisis situation, the institutional environment matters incredibly. So I added this part, and this was sort of very important for the students. I also told them explicitly what we know. And we basically know how you should do strategy in the crisis. And one of the things you shouldn't do, you should not innovate. You shouldn't be too smart because you are just adding risks. So we were debating about the value of conservative and adaptive strategies. And the third point I did simultaneously with my course, and I want to just go with it forever, I started ongoing rounds of research on a relatively small sample of about 120 former executive MBA students, business in pandemia. And one per month, I'm sending out the questionnaire and asking them what have changed, what they have done, what criteria they used, how people feel in the firms, how they cope with the stress, how they personally are dealing, what are the most important attributes to them of the leaders under pandemia time and followers, employees in the pandemia time. And I'm reporting one per month to my students and also more generally to the alumni, what we are learning during the pandemia time from this sort of joint memoir. And this sort of, I hope, makes these classes in strategic management and international business more relevant because the students have this rhythm and they are waiting through these issues for the next month summary of the research, what became more important, what less important, and how our theory can, and experience in the class can be related to this. And final point, everybody in the class has some sort of individual experience, and that's super. Now, what this research does, it creates a frame of reference for comparing this experience with what larger group is doing. And from time to time, some of the research comes as absolutely obvious, and some of the results comes as surprise, which creates some food for the discussion. Thank you.
Krzysztof, thank you. Olga has been collecting questions from the audience. And Olga, I would ask you now if you could direct some of these questions to the panel members.
Yes, of course. We've had also some participants joining on Facebook, and there is a lot of action going on online. So it's great to see everyone having good memories and greeting each other, especially from the same generations. So there is a question from Jennifer Pope, our alumna from US, who is asking, what would JB or anyone recommend for people to get to know your student when you start the class online? So she's starting one next week, and she's using Flipgrid to have the students introduce themselves. But she's wondering if there are any other ideas or tools that you would recommend for getting to know your students before your class online. Thank you.
Yes, I better respond to that. Am I supposed to respond to that?
Yeah, please start. Yeah.
You know, I don't think there is any official or a recommended way of getting to know your students. I think it takes time, but you can, somebody said, you know, how the hell can you learn about 162 students? I said, well, you put some time into it. You know, you put 4 hours. 4 hours, you can learn quite a bit about 160 students, and so on. I think the problem with asking students to introduce themselves in a particular medium could be less boring, but it could also be sort of too much attempt at creativity, and you don't learn the basics other than a sense of humor, which is useful to know. Some of the basics of where they're coming from, you know, what kind of work experience they've had, or what kind of education they've had. I find a combination of getting data, you know, hard data, like we do in IMTA, where have you been, what to do, educational achievements, positions, and so on, and then use that for individual one-on-one. You know, there's nothing wrong with going on FaceTime or email saying, by the way, what was it like to be in that position at that time when your school was doing X? For example, I was dying to ask a question of Shistov on his research. I could say, Shistov, that what you're doing is fascinating with this, you know, very hasty research project. What was the most surprising thing you learned in that research? So you relate your question to things that they've been going through that they found exciting, rather than trying to be clever or tell a joke and so on. You start with hard data about their background and then pursue it. I've started to have much more of useful, I guess social media is the right word, ways of connecting with students than I've ever done in my life before. I do more of that in a day now than I did in a year before. And I guess my attempt is, you know, I got to touch them, right? Sometimes physically, and nowadays metaphorically. You need to touch them. And to touch somebody, you have to know where they're at. I do this game in class. Look at the word understand. To understand, you need to be below them, look up, and then listen carefully. To understand. And I'm learning that that's not only true, but it also applies to me in my ability to understand others. I don't know if that makes sense. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Jim, may I add one more thing to connect it to the point that JB is making? I think that in a digital world, we can use a lot of peripheral channels of communication with participants. You know, some of them are one-to-many, some of them are many-to-one, some of them are many-to-many, and some of them are one-to-one. And in terms of understanding, sometimes the use of a good old one-to-one channel is a very useful and powerful tool that we need to learn to use, even if it requires effort and time on our part, which is basically a way to show how much we care.
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that. I was amazed how much students are thinking about that I wasn't aware of. You know, in class, I watch body language very carefully. When somebody starts to move slightly forward, I know something is touched, or their eyes go up, that means they're thinking. What I discovered to my surprise, because I was making fun of social media, everybody telling how they went to the bathroom, or whatever the story, I discovered you can learn a great deal about where people are at and how they're reacting to a set of ideas by going one-on-one. I found it very rewarding to discover that student that I had in my head put as a C+ or a B- actually has really clever ideas. So it's constantly humbling, Joe, to discover how much you can mine out of that.
Thank you so much. We actually had a couple of related questions posted in the meantime about connecting to students in a human way and getting them more receptive to online teaching in this way. That was a question also from Deepak Jain. Thank you, Deepak. I have another question from our alumnus, Vin Kozovko from Slovenia, about opportunities for business education post-COVID. What would be your view on the opportunities for business education? Maybe Krzysztof and Arshad and Tony.
Frankly speaking, I don't think there are any specific opportunities. I think it's a very harsh time, traumatic. JB asked about the things that are most surprising to me from the research. One of the most surprising thing is that this whole situation in business is similar to the mourning when somebody dies. You know, the truth is the managers were very mobilized in April and very professional. I mean, they went after the health of their employees. They reacted incredibly fast. They learned they are capable to react incredibly fast, and they did all the right moves. Now, then came the stress in May, stress in personal life, stress in their professional life. And now what is coming the fear. What will be the future? What will be the future of their firms? Now, when pandemic is going away, the business starts to be really afraid because they see the consequence long term. So that was really surprising to me. And I think if we can learn anything from it, is that it will, from the business perspective, education, it will stay with us for probably longer than we think at the moment.
If I may jump in, Olga, I was also struck, Krzysztof, earlier when you said in your teaching of strategy, you're focusing more on change. Am I correct about that?
Yes, yeah, you are. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm not surprised. And I think post-pandemic, inshallah, there is post-pandemic. I think it's going to be very different kind of education. You know, some of you have heard me talk about distinction between managing and leading. Managing is about dealing with complexity, balancing A, B. Leading is about going from A to B, to a different place. And I think what our students, whether executives or MBA, it doesn't matter. What they have to do is to really search in their own soul to see, are they willing to lead? I'm not talking about titles, positions. You have to decide, it's time for me to do this, and do it, and see what you can learn from it. Maybe screw it up once or twice. So I think one of the key issues post-pandemic is going to be how we relate classroom or not classroom, online, whatever, intellectual learning to learning from your own attempts to do things. I don't think we've done enough of that.
Okay, maybe I can add something here as well. before we go post-pandemic, I think there's a great opportunity right now, whether you're a faculty member or especially if you're a student, to think about the opportunity in a different way, and that is to consider the role of service. For all of us, of course, who are teachers, we know this is what we do for a living. But you know, if this isn't a time where we can serve other people, I'm not sure when it will be a time to do that. And service means so many different things to so many people, but there is a real need right now. I mean, people are thinking about just survival. Some people don't have food to eat. Others are got health issues and so on. And they are disconnected, and it's a time to step up and talk about leadership of service, leading from behind. Take a gap year if you have to, but do something to show that this was an important time in your life where you made a difference to someone else, perhaps more than to yourself. I think that will create a lot of value, not only for yourself down the road, in building your own character, in understanding, you know, that we are connected, whether we like it or not. I think all of the big issues that we are finding are very closely connected. It's not just equity issues. There are climate change issues that our young people are taking to the fore, and creating a new level of awareness for all of us experts who really don't know what we are talking about. I mean, come on, let's be real here. There is no expert out there who really knows how to deal with this pandemic. I mean, you hear health people, you hear politicians, everybody's an expert, but nobody has a real answer. And yet those are the same people who first should be saying, I don't know. I mean, why not learn to say, I don't know? Because this is the reality is right now, we don't have answers. We have a lot of questions, and that's a good thing for learning. So I think this is an opportunity for all of us to ask the hard questions and to serve other people and find in that service something that is going to resonate and bring the best out in you. Because there's nothing more fulfilling than trying to do something that you can't perhaps even do for yourself. I'll leave it at that.
Arshad, I'm sorry to jump in again. Olga, you have the right to shut me up if you like. I was having a very difficult discussion with my wife, who is in an assisted living facility. As most of you know, she's an extremely smart lady. And I came up with this thing that said, there are only 3 things we can do. Be creative. You can be creative, creating art or creating writing or research, whatever. Be creative. Do something useful to somebody else. To pick up your point, Arshad, do something that you serve, to use your term. And third, be able to laugh at the whole thing. I think when you say, what do we do in the pandemic? If you can be creative, or when you can be creative, be creative. Number 2, do some service to somebody that's useful. It's the best way for you to feel good about who the hell you are and what life is about. And the third is to be able to laugh at it. That's all.
One of the ways I've been trying to frame this is you look at the skill set that we're trying to develop in the people who we interact with. And there's been so much talk about, IQ and EQ, emotional intelligence. One of the things that I've been stressing is what might be thought of as AQ, your adaptability quotient. Clearly, we are living at a time right now of unprecedented uncertainty and volatility. How are we dealing with that? It's not only what we need to learn, but what do we need to unlearn at this point? What has changed? And I think we really need to kind of begin rethinking what kind of society we would like to see come out of this. And so I think there are also tremendous opportunities is to recast life as we know it. And not to try to go back to what was, but think about what could be. What would we like to see, this new post-pandemic world look like? And so I think in terms of getting people to think through what could we do? What are possibilities? How do we adapt to all of this uncertainty? I think right now education can play a critical role, in that realm.
I'm still trying to figure out what EQ is. You got AQ. I'm getting lost.
Emotional quotient, emotional intelligence.
Right.
And then, JB, what you're all about.
If I may add something else, with some sense of humor, the ability to laugh at ourselves is something that we never learn enough. And the ability to realize that we are making sometimes statements that are so wrong, that we can be so way off. And we have heard many people make big statements over the last few months. And many of them, if they had any humility, would be swallowing them, deeply. The problem is they would not care. They just invent, they will just invent new ones. And just to give you an example, last week, I was talking to one of my consulting clients, and this guy has a chain of shops, quite big, selling basically mattresses. Now, of course, he was shut down for about 2 months. I mean, he was doing something online, but it was 5% of what he usually did. And when the time came to reopen the shop, he was dead scared. His planning was, I better arrange financing with the banks because this is going to be a disaster. He started opening one small shop to see what happened. And last week he called me and he said, Joe, after 25 years in this business, I know nothing. He said, I am breaking sales records day after day. I was arranging extra finance because I thought I'm going to go bankrupt. I am paying back things I didn't expect to pay back. And what happens, after so many months at home, people have realized that their mattress is lousy, and they have to go to the shop, and people are buying expensive ones, so like the premium product line is the one that's selling well. Hey, let's not take our own thoughts and assumptions very seriously because we can be so way off.
That's also speaking to, the whole business of universities who are built on expertise. And right now, I want to meet that expert who can tell me something as simple as, people are suddenly become medical experts, political analysts. They can solve the world's problems. They can figure out climate change. Come on, give us a break. I think what this is also helping us to do is to, in addition to the humility that Joe speaks about and the lightness of being that JB talked about, is also, to work with other people and give them a chance, because too many times experts are crowding out thinking, and they are just one way or the highway, very narrowly focused when we see the connections on display today. And that those connections are some of the best food for thought for all of us as learners. And so be a learner first. Unlearn, as as Tony said, relearn, and admit that you don't know shit. I'm sorry to use pardon my French.
I can't help but quote for you a line that years ago I heard, and it stuck with me very powerfully. During the pandemic, I've discovered how powerful it is. It's a very simple phrase. The guy said, the other possibility is equally provocative, that I may be wrong. I think that's a whole different platform of maturity, if you can say that. And I'm learning to say it Arshad, because I've discovered I can be absolutely wrong, as Joe was pointing out.
Jim, do you want to
be provocative? I may be wrong.
Sorry, thank you. Jim, do you want still to take one more question? We have 8 minutes left, or do you want to go to the closing comments perhaps? Your microphone is muted.
Let's go with questions.
Okay, I have one more specific question actually from Roxolana Voronowska, our alumna from Lviv Business School in Ukraine. And Roxolana was asking, how would you recommend to adjust writing cases to online teaching? So case writing for online teaching or adjusting existing cases to online teaching. Who would like to take that one?
If nobody else is rushing to jump in, fools venture forth where angels fear to tread. So I will jump in. Number one, they gotta be shorter.
Yeah.
Absolutely shorter. I would say maximum 6 or 7 or 8 pages. The other thing is to have multimedia. Seriously, I didn't think I would use that phrase, but it could be 2 minutes of a YouTube video, or it could be something. I don't mean necessarily an interview with a senior executive, but some different way of getting data across. So very much using different channel of data. And because I think Krzysztof referred to this, it gets boring. You know, online can be boring very rapidly. So shorter cases and different media you can introduce either before or during the discussion of the case.
And if I may add one more condition, would be, if possible, make it from an industry which is attractive, which people have heard about. You know, don't look for fancy, sophisticated categories because there, among other things, you will not be able to explain something meaningful in 6 pages.
So Joe, I guess the answer is showers and mattresses.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Krzysztof, maybe any interesting cases from your research with companies during the pandemic that you plan to write about?
No, I think that JB and Joe comments are perfect. I mean, no, at the moment, for example, I don't plan. As somebody would used to say, I don't even buy green bananas at the moment. Okay, so I think there will be time to write about what companies did in pandemic. But if I wrote anything, I mean, I would relate to what Tony also was saying. It's an interesting, to me, situation, because we always talk in the field of strategy about trade-offs. That you have to trade one value or one option for another. Now, what pandemic did in many companies, in probably all of them, it sort of create a different situation when trade-offs are out of question in some areas, like safety, health, and the truth is that you know, for the first time in the history, as I remember, the death visited business, and it became it really changed the leadership and management perspective. And through this, my research for 3 months, the first criterion that comes all the time, it's a safety of the employees. And it's not propaganda. Probably this pandemic make this whole issue of people again more visible because we tend to forget about it. and that's it. So I'm not as good writer as Joe or JB, and short, up to date, but dealing with universal issue. And humans and their safety and well-being is an universal issue to me at the moment.
Thank you. Jim, over to you to wrap this up.
No, thank you. Danisha, would you like to make any concluding remarks?
Denise, you have to unmute.
Thank you, thank you. No, thank you very much for giving me the floor. I got a task from Slađana, our colleague in CEEMAN, who just wrote me a message that I may not forget to point out that we shall have a seminar soon, second half of October, with two alumni. Perhaps you remember them. I think they were 2011 or 12. One of them is Omar Luti from Switzerland, and the other one is Kaya Pristupa Jadsa, or something like that. It's a difficult name to pronounce, who will have 3 sessions in 3 weeks, just, on EdTech beyond the pandemic emergency. And Nikos Milonopoulos, a Greek guy who is really very good in that, and he had some webinars for CEEMAN. So that everybody who is listening should remember this and look to the website to come to these seminars, because the issues what we heard today are very similar to that what we were tackling already at our webinars. Only, of course, our professors, IMTA professors, are always going deeper, and and because of their rich experience, they can really share their wisdom with all of us on a different way. So this is what I would like to say, and once again, thank you very, very much for doing this great launch, as Olga is calling it, and now I have to do it too. And I am looking very much forward to the next June, when I hope that we don't have any COVID or any other bad thing, but that you can once again make the real performance like you usually do, face to face. So thank you very, very, very much. And Tony, I'm here seeing that I see you at Prime meeting
Tomorrow,
isn't it? Thank you very much. Thank you. And Jim, I'm very happy you found your time and that everything worked technically, and that now we shall have MBA online with Jim and in face-to-face too. And we had some other seminars. We had 9 webinars and so on. So we are also trying out. But one thing, if I may add, one amateur, from an amateur, but still an educator. What I discovered is what JB said today, or Krzysztof, somebody said, if you are an excellent professor, you are excellent also, in the other situation. Or the opposite, if you are a lousy professor, you cannot be fantastic and brilliant, And that is what I could see looking at least to 2030, of these experiences. So great, thank you. And I'm sure that Jim would have the final word.
Thank you, Danica. In conclusion, briefly, thanks very much to all of our panel members. Thanks to Olga, thanks to Danica. Thanks also for those who signed up to listen to the webinar, and please, all of you, keep safe until we see each other again. Thank you.